Our first guest is arguably the most influential of the bunch. She was a pioneering feminist who labored long and hard to advance women's rights. She is the person who coined the term birth control, but who is largely credited with making it legal and accepted by the masses, regardless of their religious affiliation. She was a sex educator who authored many books on the subject of sex, motherhood, and eugenics, including The Pivot of Civilization, What Every Girl Should Know, and Motherhood in Bondage. Time magazine named her one of the 20 most influential Americans of all time. And finally, she is the founder of a sprawling medical empire that operates 650 health clinics in the United States, Planned Parenthood. Would you please give a warm welcome to Margaret Sanger. Our second guest is a Russian immigrant to the United States at the age of 26. She staked out a unique career that blended writing and philosophy. Her two most famous novels were Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, and the philosophy that she founded is called objectivism. For those of you in this room who have never read any of her writings, you should know that she has had a profound impact on legions of prominent leaders in the United States. One of her most provocatively titled treatises is called The Virtue of Selfishness. On that note, would you please welcome Ayn Rand. Welcome in. Our next guest hails from Albania. She committed herself to Catholic religious life, and at the age of 21 she took her first vows. After living in a convent in India for many years and serving as a head mistress of a school, she received a call from God to live among and serve the very poorest of the poor in Calcutta, which is one of the most destitute places on this planet. She founded the Missionaries of Charities with about a buck in her pocket. Now imagine walking into one of the poorest places on this planet with little more than the shirt on your back. But before she retired to more heavenly pursuits, she leveraged that buck into an international outreach to 133 countries, served by some 4,500 women. She was recognized for her humanitarian outreach by receiving a Nobel Peace Prize in 1979. And in 2016, Pope Francis named her a saint. Would you please welcome Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I will turn the mic over to our moderator momentarily. I struggle to introduce this man because is he a poet, a novelist, a philosopher, a theologian, a biographer, an orator, or even a debater? After all, he debated the well-known attorney and atheist Clarence Darrow on the existence of God. Rumor has it that he mopped the floor with his hapless adversary. His book, The Everlasting Man, was a significant influence on C.S. Lewis's conversion to Christianity. No less a figure than Archbishop Fulton Sheen identified our moderator as the greatest influence on his own writing because he never used a useless word. He saw the value of a paradox, and he avoided what was trite. Our esteemed moderator does not fit into a neat category. He was a once-upon-a-time atheist who became a Roman Catholic. He is one of the most quoted men of the 20th century. Would you please welcome the irrepressible G.K. Chesterton.
Thank you. And say, I'd have a name is Quiner anyway.
English.
Good man, good man. Ladies, pleasure. A pleasure. Pleasure. I am honored to be here tonight at the Ancient Order of Hibernians to moderate this esteemed panel.
For God's sake, Chesterton, this is the Iowans for Life banquet.
Oh, so you do believe in God then, Mrs. Rand?
I most certainly do not. Now, can you get this conversation started?
One of the great disadvantages of hurry, ma'am, is that it takes such a long time. By Jove, you're right. Here are my notes. The Iowans for Life banquet, clash of creeds. Well, we'll begin with you then, Mrs. Sanger. What is your creed?
Birth control. It is the first important step a woman must take towards the goal of her freedom. It's the first step she must take to be man's equal. It is the first step they must both take together towards human emancipation.
In your writings, you reference birth control in terms of family planning. How does this apply to your creed?
Well, I believe we should stop our national habit of human waste.
And what do you mean by that?
I can't tell you how many women have approached me over the years begging me to answer this question. Please, miss, tell me, what should I do not to have another baby right away? Well, these tragic women lived a life of poverty caused by birthing child after child with no means of support. So, Mr. Chesterton, I see no wider meaning of family planning than control. As far as restriction, there are definitely some families around the world where there is every indication that restriction should be an order, not just an ideal. And that is the betterment for the family and the race. And that is why I feel control.
We will return to you in a little while and allow you to build upon this creed. As I gaze around this grand hall, I suspect there may be some converts to your philosophy. But before we move on, do you believe in God, ma'am?
Heavens, no.
Indeed. I will now turn over to Miss Eliza Zinovievna Rosenbaum, now known as Ayn Rand, to hear more about her philosophy. Mrs. Rand, what is your creed?
My creed, in essence, is the concept of man as a heroic being, with moral purpose as the only purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute.
From what I gather, you've generated quite a following amongst American conservatives for your economic views. Is your creed then primarily rooted in economics?
I am not primarily an advocate of capitalism, but of egoism. I am not primarily an advocate of egoism, but of reason.
And
if one recognizes the supremacy of reason and applies it consistently, all the rest follows.
And we know where you stand when it comes to a belief in God.
Yes, let me just say that God, as traditionally defined, is a systematic contradiction to every valid metaphysical principle. The point is wider than just the Judeo-Christian concept of God.
So then, you don't believe in a heaven?
No argument will get you from this world to a supernatural world. No reason will lead you to a world contradicting this one. No method of inference, Mr. Chesterton, can enable you to leap from existence to a super existence.
Well, Mother Teresa's presence here might throw a bit of a monkey wrench into your theory. Nonetheless, thank you for introducing our next guest. My dear Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, what is your creed?
God is love. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love until it hurts. So tell me, Mr. Chesterton, what do you think of this clash of creeds?
Well, frankly, I'm baffled. Two of you fine ladies are American, one through birth and the other through immigration. Yet, I don't know what to make of you. America is the only country in the world founded on a creed. And it sounds quite different than either of yours. That creed is set forth with dogmatic and even theological lucidity in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration is perhaps the only piece of practical politics that is also theoretical politics and great literature. It enunciates that all men are created equal.
Women.
Are equal in their claim to justice, that the government exists to give them that justice, and the government's authority is, for that reason, just. Further, it denounces atheism as it clearly names the Creator as the ultimate authority from which these equal rights are derived. So, ladies, it seems as though Mother Teresa's creed, which acknowledges a creator, is far more American than either of yours.
Nonsense, Chesterton. You can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of reality. America is culturally bankrupt. One of America's tragic errors is that many of her best minds believe, as they did in the past, that the solution is to turn anti-intellectual and rely on some Cracker Barrel sort of folksy wisdom.
Exactly. Mrs. Rand and I don't see eye to eye on a wide range of subjects, but we do agree that this Cracker Barrel folksy sort of wisdom of which she refers, or all this God talk, has been destructive to America.
In what way?
With all due respect to Mother Teresa, I do not consider charity to be a major virtue, or above all, a moral duty. There is nothing wrong with helping other people, my dear Mother Teresa, if and when they are worthy of the help, and you can afford to help them. The idea that I am fighting is that charity is some sort of moral duty and a primary virtue.
I see it a little bit differently. Organized charity itself is a symptom of a malignant social disease.
Why would that be, my dear?
Charity aims to diminish and control the spread of misery, destitution, and the menacing evils that spring out of this sinister, fertile soil.
And what is so malignant about that?
Oh, it's the surest sign that our civilization has bred, is breeding, and is perpetuating constantly increasing numbers of defectives, delinquents, and dependents. So my criticism is not at the failure of philanthropy, but rather at its success.
The proper method of judging when or whether to help another person is by reference to one's own rational self-interest and one's own hierarchy of values. The time, money, or effort one gives, or the risk one takes, should be proportionate to the value of the person in relation to one's own happiness.
So, in other words, a human being has no intrinsic value unless they make you feel good?
Mother Teresa, just think about the people you work with and their drain on society. I mean, we must open our eyes to the terrific cost to the community of this dead weight of human waste.
My dear Margaret, poor are very great people. They can teach us so many wonderful things.
For God's sakes, dear, I know you mean well, but this benevolence is not merely ineffectual, but is positively injurious to the community and the future race.
Don't you see? It's for God's sake that my sisters and I work with these wonderful people who are His creation. Let me share a story. One evening, we went out to a street and we picked up 4 people. And one of them was in a musical condition. I told his sisters, you take care of the other 3 and I will take care of the one who looks the worst. So I did for her all that my love can do. I put her in bed and there was such a beautiful smile on her face. She took hold of my hand and said only this, thank you. And then she died.
Mother Teresa, I've only known you a few minutes, but I already consider you a dear friend. By Mrs. Rand's criteria, your own rational self-interest and hierarchy of values would have been your only criteria for helping this woman. But I've got to ask a question I feel hanging on the lips of many in our audience. How did that make you feel?
Mr. Chesterton, I can now examine my conscience before her, and I asked myself, what would I say if I were in her place? And my answer was very simple. I would have tried to draw a little attention to myself. I would have said, I am hungry, I'm cold, I am in pain, or something. But she gave me so much more. She gave me her grateful love, and she died with a smile on her face.
Did you have other experiences like this one?
But then there was the man we picked up from the street, covered in worms. And we took him to the home, and all he could say was, I have lived like an animal in the street, but I'm going to die like an angel, loved and cared for. And after we removed the worms from his body, all he could say was, with a big smile, Sister, I am going home to God. And he died. It was so wonderful to see the greatness of this person who could speak like that, without complaining, without blaming anybody, like an angel. The greatness of people who are spiritually rich, even when they are materially poor. We are not social workers. We may be doing social work in the eyes of some, but we must be contemplatives in the hearts of the world, because we are touching the body of Christ, and we are always in His presence.
But don't you see, this is my point. So much suffering, so much needless suffering.
Suffering as such is not a value. Only man's fight against such suffering is. So if you choose to help a man who suffers, do it on the ground of his fight to recover, of his virtue, of his rational record, or the fact that he suffers unjustly. Then your action is still a trade, and his virtue is payment for your help.
What if the man, in your estimation, has no virtue?
But to help a man who has no virtue, to help him on the ground of his suffering as such, to accept his faults, his need, as a claim, is to accept the mortgage of a 0 on your own values.
Mother Teresa.
Oh, my dear Mrs. Rand, for love to be true, it has to hurt. It is not conditional. I must be willing to give whatever it takes to not harm one, and in fact to do good to them. This requires that I be with till it hurts. Otherwise there is no true love in me, and I bring in justice, not peace, to those around me.
Do you see what I mean? This is a perfect example of the folksy sort of Cracker Barrel wisdom that I was speaking of earlier.
Mr. Chesterton, I owe you an apology for cutting you off a moment ago. The last thing I desire is a quarrel with you.
Mrs. Sanger, In my experience, people typically quarrel because they cannot argue.
Sir, I'm just a mere reformer trying to make the world a little better place. I don't pretend to be a debater.
The reformer, in my experience, tends to usually be right about what is wrong and wrong about what is right.
Your point?
Eugenics.
And what would you like to know about eugenics?
I would like for you to candidly share your views on the matter.
Well, I have nothing to hide. As I've stated publicly, eugenics is the most adequate and thorough avenue to the solution of racial, political, and social problems. And what's wrong with that?
Eugenics is the denial of the Declaration of Independence, a document, as you may have gathered, I hold in high esteem. Eugenics argues that far from all men being born equal, numbers of them ought not to be born at all.
No, Mr. Chesterton, I do not feel that eugenics is an assault on human dignity, but I'll tell you what is. It is an assault on human dignity when you require every self-sustaining working and middle-class family to reduce the size of their own families in order to support the often unwanted children of less competent parents.
And how is this done?
Chiefly through higher taxes or contributions to charity that help support the incompetents. This burden of helping out unwanted children of unfit parents does not fall upon the rich. It falls upon every working, self-sustaining family in this state and across the country, while keeping alive a stratum of the population that has nothing to give back to civilization, but will use up its energies and resources of the country.
For the sake of our audience, unfamiliar with the term eugenics, Merriam-Webster defines it thusly. Eugenics is the practice or advocacy of controlled selective breeding of human populations as, through sterilization, for the betterment of humanity's genetic composition. Mrs. Sanger, in 1932, you unveiled a plan for peace built upon eugenics. Tell us about it and the population parliament that would rule over your plan.
Well, I call upon the Congress of the United States of America to set up a special department for the study of population problems. I call on them to appoint a parliament of population directors that would cover the various branches of science. They would direct and control population through birth rates, immigration, and they would distribute according to the national needs that go along with fitness, taste, and the interest of the individuals.
Why would a country as great as America need a population congress?
To raise the general intelligence of the population.
Modern intelligence won't accept anything on authority, Mrs. Sanger, but it will accept anything without it. That's why your plan stands a chance.
No, you are so wrong, Mr. Chesterton. My population congress would be a credentialed parliament of some of the best and brightest minds in their fields. They would be empowered to apply a stern and rigid form of sterilization and segregation to a grade of population whose progeny is already tainted, or whose inheritance is such that they have objectionable traits that would be passed along to the birth.
And how would you go about implementing such a challenging undertaking?
It's important for America to make sure that it is taken care of future burdens, of the various births that are going to come from unfit parents. So the government would ask those that have transmissible diseases if they would voluntarily consent to sterilization. Even more, the whole dysgenic population would have the choice of segregation or sterilization.
That's quite a mouthful, ma'am. By dysgenic, you are referring to groups of people that have a detrimental effect on future generations. Who are these people that you desire to sterilize and segregate?
No more children should be born when either mother or father, though healthy themselves, find that their child might be mentally or physically disabled. By all means, no child should be born if either mother or father suffers from such diseases as tuberculosis, gonorrhea, syphilis, cancer, epilepsy, insanity, drunkenness, or mental disorders.
Anyone else?
Morons, mental defectives, illiterates, paupers, unimplorables, prostitutes, criminals, and dope fiends.
And how would segregation come about?
There would be farmlands and homesteads where the segregated persons would be taught to work under competent instructors for the period of their entire lives.
Mrs. Sanger, I will simply summarize your eugenics creed thusly. Eugenics is a philosophy whereby the deepest things of the flesh and spirit should have the most direct relationship with the dictatorship of the state.
Nonsense! I am not talking about a dictatorship. I am talking about human liberation.
I suspect the rest of our esteemed guests would like to weigh in on what human liberation means to them, especially in light of your call for coercion to accomplish your population control. Mrs. Rand, your thoughts?
What is the basic, the essential, the crucial principle that differentiates freedom from slavery? It is the principle of voluntary action versus physical coercion or compulsion. People must be free to agree or disagree. People must be free to cooperate or to pursue their own independent course, each according to his own rational judgment. The freedom is a requirement of man's mind. The only proper purpose of a government is to protect man's rights.
Mother Teresa, your thoughts?
Human liberation is found in God. When I think of human liberation, I can't help but think of a beautiful prayer written by one of the most famous liberators who ever lived, Saint Francis of Assisi. Mr. Chesterton, I believe you know the prayer. Would you join me? And anyone here in the audience, if you know the prayer, please join in with us.
Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not try to explain, but to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
Amen. This is the path to human liberation. This is the path to life.
Mother Teresa, I shall savor this prayer more than ever. In our few remaining moments, I would like to delve deeper into each of your creeds and define exactly what this path to life to which Mother Teresa referred means. When I arrived here earlier this evening, Mr. Quiner introduced me to a Mr. Google, who, frankly, has an answer for everything. And Mr. Google quickly caught me up to speed on the state of human liberation and the rocky path to life that the United States has been on since the decision of a certain Supreme Court case some 45 years ago. Mrs. Sanger, Abortion is the law of the land in the U.S. Is this an answer to a prayer from your perspective?
I don't pray, Mr. Chesterton. I act.
Good woman.
As for abortions, even though there are cases where even the law recognizes an abortion as justifiable if recommended by a physician, I assert that the hundreds of thousands of abortions that are performed each year in America are a disgrace to civilization. So, to your question, Mr. Chesterton, what is the path to life? When motherhood becomes the fruit of a deep yearning and not the result of ignorance or accident, the children will then be the foundation of a new race.
Mrs. Rand, your thoughts on this abortion on demand?
Abortion is a moral right that should be left to the sole discretion of the woman involved. Morally, nothing other than her wish is to be considered. Who can conceivably have the right to dictate to her what disposition she is to make on the functions of her own body?
I suggest that perhaps the son or daughter in the womb should have a say. Mother Teresa, your thoughts?
I believe that the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion. It is a war against the child, a direct killing of the innocent, murder by the mother herself. And if we accept that a mother can kill even her own child, how can we tell other people not to kill one another? How do we persuade a woman not to have an abortion? As always, we must persuade her with love and remind ourselves that love means to be willing to give until it hurts. Jesus gave himself for us. So the mother who is thinking of abortion should be helped to love. That is, to give of herself, give of her time, her plans, to respect the life of that child. The father of that child should also be giving until it hurts. By abortion, the mother does not learn to love, but kills, even the baby, to solve her problems. And by abortion, the father is told that he does not have to take any responsibility for the child that he has brought into the womb. He is likely to put other women into the same trouble. So abortion just gets more abortion. Please don't kill the child. Give me the child. I want the child. I'm willing to accept the child and give that child to a married couple who would love and be loved by the child. Any country that accepts abortion is not willing to accept the fact that they don't love, but that they are using any kind of violence to get what they want. So the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion. Mr. Chesterton, your thoughts on abortion?
Abortion is the mutilation of womanhood and the massacre of men unborn.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we need to bring this conversation to a conclusion. Let us thank our guests for being here today. GK, if you can bring them on up. Here we are. Just give them a big round of applause. I'd also like to invite up Maggie DeWitty. I think it's possible this Q&A session could get intense, and so we would like Maggie to be able to represent Islands for Life with this esteemed panel. So Maggie, if you'll come on over and join us. Okay. Okay, let's dig in these questions. The first question and answer session in history, featuring G.K. Chesterton, Ayn Rand, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and Margaret Sanger. And you had the honor of the first question. Father Chris Wright, what is your question and who's it for?
My question is for Mr. Chesterton. Sir, I noticed that you wear a sword. Can I ask why?
The answer is very simple, Father Chris. I like things that make a point.
Chesterton, logic in action. Thank you, Father Chris. Our next questioner hails from the south side of Des Moines, a product of the south side, Monsignor Frank Title. Who is your question for, Monsignor?
My question is to Mrs. Rand. In your book, The Virtue of Selfishness, you indicate that every individual has a right to make his own moral decision, but has no right to impose that decision on someone else. My question is, you talked about an individual having a right to make a decision to have an abortion. But how does that square with the fact that that decision impacts the innocent life of an unborn?
Monsignor, an embryo has no rights. Rights do not pertain to a potential, only an actual being. A child cannot attain any rights until it is born. The living take precedence over the not yet living or the unborn.
Back to Maggie Whitty for a follow-up. Thank you, Monsignor.
Mrs. Rand, potential certainly doesn't define or disqualify personhood. It's irrelevant to this conversation. And human rights are not determined by size, intellect, location, state of development, or desirability of the person involved. It's a scientific fact at the instant of fertilization, according to embryologists. These scientists tell us that new life begins when the sperm and the ovum, neither of which can sustain life or direct growth itself, come together at fertilization. For the first time, this new life has all 46 chromosomes and all the directions or DNA needed for the rest of life. The sex of the baby, the hair color, everything is already fixed. Humanity is fixed. Personhood is fixed, as if there is even a distinction. The rational mind, something you hold up to be something of a deity, Mrs. Rand, tells us that no human being can force his or her decisions on others. End of story.
Our next questioner, pastor of Christ the King Catholic Church, Father P.J. McManus. Who is your question for?
Mrs. Sanger. Mrs. Sanger, you gave a rather impassioned explanation of abortion as a disgrace on civilization. What would you do to decrease its incidence?
Well, I'm sure a Catholic priest isn't going to enjoy my response, but the answer is clear as the starch in your collar. Birth control. Parenthood needs to be planned. For the millions of babies that are born to mothers who choose not to have an abortion, there is no welcome for these unplanned births. Now, how often I've stood by the bedside of a mother who is in labor when I see her cry out tears of gladness and sighing, "Thank God," when told that her baby was born dead. Father McManus, the title of tonight's conversation is The Clash of Creeds. And there is never more a clash that is conspicuous than on this subject, but I make no apologies for standing by my convictions born of life experiences. Parenthood needs to be planned.
Well, Mrs. Sanger, you have certainly lived up to your reputation for never pulling a punch. Father McManus, thank you for your question. Maggie, would you like to weigh in from your perspective?
Tom, you guessed correctly. Mrs. Sanger's creed has been put to the test, and it has failed miserably. And I'm not reacting as a practicing Roman Catholic. I'm reacting to her own standard that human abortion is a disgrace on civilization, which I certainly agree. Right or wrong, women are using contraception. Both NARAL and Planned Parenthood make claims that 99% of women have used some form of artificial birth control. And sadly, their claim is largely true. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 99% of sexually active women between the ages of 15 and 44 have used some form of birth control. And 88% of those women have used birth control at some point, whether they've ever been sexually active or not. Let that sink in. Despite the realization of Mrs. Sanger's dream of widespread adoption of artificial birth control, nearly 60 million unique human beings have been aborted since Roe versus Wade. And let one more piece of data sink in. It comes from the Guttmacher Institute, the research arm for Planned Parenthood. It says that in 2000, nearly half of the women that were on birth control were on some sort of contraceptive method, became pregnant that month. So they were on birth control, seeking an abortion, and became pregnant. And research from around the world confirms that. A report out of Great Britain puts the numbers even higher, that 60% of women on contraception who are obtaining an abortion had an unplanned pregnancy.
Why is that?
Quite simply, contraception fails. You know, Wits for Life recently published a women's reproductive health resource book, which you can download for free online at our website, iwinsforlife.org. In fact, I have a copy with me here I'd like to present to Mrs. Sanger for some interesting reading on her trip home. If you look on page 5 of that, you'll find some startling research that was published in the New York Times about this very topic. It says that 9 out of 100 women who are on birth control experience an unplanned pregnancy within the first year. Jump to the 10th year, and it's 61 out of 100 women will experience an unplanned pregnancy. And this is despite implementing Mrs. Sanger's approach.
Maggie, could I add something to this discussion?
Well, there's no one we'd rather hear more from.
In recent years, I've gotten to know a simply wonderful person by the name of Giovanni Battista Enrico Antonio Maria Montini. You may know him better as Pope Paul VI. God inspired him to write a beautiful encyclical entitled Humanae Vitae. In it, he said that decoupling sexual intimacy from its procreative and unitive basis is ultimately destructive. He warned us that a contraceptive culture would lead to an increase in marital infidelity. Has this come to pass? Yes. He warned that there would be a general lowering of moral standards. Has this come to pass? Yes. He warned about a loss of respect for women. Has this come to pass? Yes. He warned about coercive government intervention in women's reproductive lives. Has this come to pass? So, to my dear friend Margaret, I commend you for your concern for the plight of women and unwanted children. I would simply encourage you to learn about a more effective approach to contraception called natural family planning.
Thank you, Mother Teresa. We have time for a couple last questions.
Mr. Quiner, I have a question for Mother Teresa.
Hold that. I'm going to get one more question in and we'll come back because this is going to be a zinger, I bet. And I'd like to ask Marilyn Lane, who's been a busy girl in recent weeks. Beautiful Christ Our Life concert. And who's your question for?
I have another question for Mr. Chesterton, please. Sir, the two sides of the abortion debate seem to simply shout at one another. Do you offer any sort of compromise on this contentious issue?
Indeed I do. Let all the babies be born, and then drown those we do not like.
And a modest proposal for sure, for these modest times. We have time for one last question, and it appears Mrs. Rand is itching to put this final question. The question is yours.
Thank you. Mother Teresa, it seems that one should never fail to proclaim moral judgment. This is where your efforts, although commendable by any standard of this audience, fall short. Don't you see that your outreach to the immoral only perpetuates moral disintegration? One must never pass judgment on another. One must never tolerate morally anything. And the good is only distinguished by not distinguishing good versus evil. Don't you see, Mother Teresa? Don't you see that this age calls for swift and decisive moral judgment? Can't you see the error of your ways?
My dear Mrs. Rand, if you judge people, you have no time to love them.